Okay, Dad. So today is April 5th, Friday. And I feel like I'm becoming a doomsayer. One of those
Yeah,
guys that's on the street corner, ringing a bell saying the end is nigh.
yeah.
So maybe we can try to think, is there any good news going on in the world? Is there anything good happening?
Good news. Well, I mean, it certainly is good news in Russia. I mean, again, as we hear from your sister and from many other reports, a booming economy, a growing self confidence,
Is there any good news for us in
yeah, a
America?
sense of a brighter future. And um, well, in America, yeah, that's a tough one. Is there good news? It's almost that the news is so bad in a way that it's good. I mean that it's just that more people, I think, are waking up to the reality of our regime, of um, of the American state. I think there's a real resistance. America was just was the most prosperous country in the world for the longest, and still I think is fair to say is the most powerful. Maybe that won't be true for much longer. Um, And I think that long period of prosperity and strength just taught people to be complacent, and they didn't really pay attention to these disturbing trends, and didn't really notice that the old cast of characters that used to run the place had been replaced by a new cast that were very different. It's really America has undergone a transformation, and it's not for the better. And I think the only good news is that whereas it was very hard to find people that saw that, understood that this cultural revolution, as I, described it earlier, um, who saw it for what it was, um, those people were few and far between. We were way out on the fringes, and that's just not so true anymore.
So you're saying the good news is that more people recognize that it's all bad news?
Right. Well, it does actually give me some hope because the fact is, the more people that recognize it, the greater the chance is that something can be done to fix the problems. I'll just give you an example. Somebody like, none of these people are perfect, but like Tucker Carlson
Hmm.
has a huge following, right? A lot of people listen to him, and he's quite open. I don't think we're that far from him. There's some places that he doesn't dare to go, or where he, I think maybe he treads carefully. But he's quite open about his contempt for the regime, and I think, that's how he sees it. He doesn't see things very differently than we
Hmm.
do. And he has this huge following, he was the single most popular, most watched news show on TV before he was removed. Very odd for that to happen, right?
Right.
But and I think if most people saw it for what it was, that he was a dissident and they got rid of him.
Right. He was actually maybe one of the only news shows that I was watching. And when he got fired, I just stopped. I just didn't find anybody else on news interesting or honest or truthful. Um, um, yeah. So we ended the last podcast talking about the diving into potentially the state of America and the decline and potential for national divorce. When you're saying that more people are aware of the problems and then we could address the solutions, then what is the solution? Is the solution, a divorce or?
It seems to me that would be the best solution. They would. Um, well, we have divisions that are, I think, that are so stark right now, the gaps that just can't be bridged between um, different factions within this country. That really the most humane thing to do is to divorce. The alternative is that there's a fight for one group or another to achieve total dominance. It clearly, what we call I'll say the establishment left is in charge. Um, they run the show, and And they're not reluctant to employ, increasingly, let's say, unconstitutional um, measures to maintain their power and to silence their opponents. But we certainly have fallen short of civil war or violence in the streets, and we're not yet a totalitarian state, but all those things are possibilities if I think we continue on our current course. And again, the best thing would be to say, let's say, you're somebody in the establishment left, and you just despise these deplorables in the hinterlands. Well, maybe the best thing to do is simply to separate, and then you just don't have to deal with them anymore, and you can have your blue state just the way you want it, and you can carry out these reforms without any serious resistance. Why not? Isn't it good for you too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I like the idea of it, but how likely do you think something like this could happen? I feel like this year, this with an election year, and just the never Trumpers, and just the divide between the left and right is so extreme that whoever wins this election, there's just going to be chaos. Half of the country isn't going to accept it. Do you think it's possible that this election has been it's being played so dirtily right now, and there's so much animosity? Do you think that it's possible that we could actually have a true fissure where states break away and say that they don't accept Trump or don't accept Biden, whoever wins this election? It's looking like Trump.
Yeah. Well, you have to say it's possible. I don't think it's likely, but when things happen, they're never likely in a way. They're always a surprise when those fissures finally occur. Those revolutions happen or whatever. I think they tend to take everybody by surprise, because you do, including myself. I think as we're talking about the Middle East in our last podcast. And I was saying, just based on what I've seen, again and again, I've thought that okay, this time people are going to wake up, and they never do. So I've just come accustomed to think that the deep state, the establishment, can get away with anything, and no matter how outrageous it is, how demonstrably false it is. Sometimes, a lie gets exposed and I think, oh, now people will see that it's a lie. But most people just go on. They don't really notice. Everything continues as before. That's a general tendency. But I think it's probably even a mistake on my part to assume that's how it's always going to be. As you're saying, there's a point, where eventually the cumulative effect of all these exposures of these conflicts and so on finally does take us to a tipping point, or a breaking point.
There's so many big lies right now.
Right.
I mean, we have the whole Ukraine lie, this lie of completely unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. We have the Middle East lie of Israel just defending itself by carrying out a genocide, and then we have all these lies domestically in terms of that we got this strong economy, and we have this great democracy. It just seems like there's so many big lies that are being exposed right now. I feel like it's going to happen, and I don't know if I'm partly almost hoping that it's going to happen because I've just been talking about it so much. I just feel like something has to break.
Right. Well, it can be a generational thing. You can say on one side, I think that right, it's a younger generation. Is probably more. I don't know, maybe optimistic is not the right word to use here, but
maybe more aware.
Well, or believes more in the possibility of change, of a real change of course. And, people like me who've seen, us continue on this course, I just start to think, well, that's the way it's always going to be. And you could say, well, maybe that's wisdom on my part, but perhaps it's, I have to remind myself, just looking at past other countries, the histories of other countries, eventually breaking points are reached, and these courses really can change in a dramatic way. In my lifetime, the big change, which was entirely unexpected, was the fall of the Soviet Union.
Mm.
Right. When I was young, it was just something that was the Soviet Union was just like a mountain in the background, and if anybody told me, that one day that mountain will fall, they say, just get out of here. This is never going to happen. Nobody thought that. I think when it actually did, somebody found one political scientist had written, one article in one rather obscure journal, predicting it. But that was it.
Well,
And so anyway, it's just that when these things happen, they're very hard to predict.
Did people within the Soviet Union expect it to fall?
I don't think they did either. That's a good question. I can't. That's something that I should look into. But I know that people had stopped believing in it.
Mm.
So it's just like more and more people were, maybe up through the 60s or whatever. You had a lot of people, young and idealistic people, actually believed in the Soviet project.
When you say people stopped believing in it, do you mean the people in the Western world stopped believing it?
Or no, I was actually talking about
the Soviet Union itself.
Right. The citizens of the Soviet Union, they themselves stopped believing in it.
Well, then, and kind of that's what we're maybe facing here in the United States is people here in the United States have stopped believing in the system. At least a growing number of people lose faith in the system. And that's the first sign that a system, I think the surest sign that a system is going to break. It's hard to predict when.
Exactly. I think it's inevitable. It's a question of when. I can't remember who said there's a lot of ruin in a country, meaning that things can keep on falling apart for a long time before they fall apart entirely. And so it's hard to say, things have been falling apart at an accelerating rate in this country. But maybe there's still a lot of ruin left.
Right. There's a lot of straws being put on the camel's back now.
Right.
Which straw do you think is the biggest? Which one should we address now?
I think actually, the two big ones that we've been talking about, Ukraine and Palestine, I think they're, maybe not for, I think for the elite anyway, because that's something that's really hurt the position of, these two crises have really affected, first of all, the U.S.'s international standing. Again, as we pointed out, perhaps a lot of people in this country still don't realize how important they are. They said that they haven't seen the effects, but we are seeing, at least, especially I think with Palestine. And, I think up until recently, up until actually October 7th, like most of the hollowing out in this country, the skepticism and cynicism, about mainstream media and establishment, that was almost entirely on the right side of the spectrum. But now you're seeing it on the left side. There's, a lot of the Democratic base is looking at this and saying, these guys are just lying to us. The New York Times lies to us every day. This is, I think, and so that's the hollowing out that's starting to take place on the other side of the spectrum.
Like you said, Tucker Carlson was one of the few that would actually address these huge tectonic shifts happening in Ukraine and in Palestine. I spent a couple hours just watching the news last night just to kind of get an idea of what people were talking about, because in our last podcast, you were saying that there was basically radio silence from mainstream media on the Israeli strike on the Iranian embassy, where they killed over 50 Syrians and Iranians that were diplomats, on Iranian soil, on the Iranian consulate. And I wanted to see if that was true. And I turned on the news, checked, Fox and MSNBC. You're right. There was nothing. I saw no report on Ukraine. I saw no report on Israel-Palestine. I'm sure if you watch long enough, there will be a few small stories and talk sympathetic of Israel, of course, or painting Putin as this terrible person if you watch long enough. But spent 2 hours. I was just watching, hearing stuff about P. Diddy, DEI, illegal immigration, things like this, which these are big stories in their own right, but they pale in comparison compared to what's happening in Ukraine and Russia and Palestine, Gaza, Palestine, and Israel. Like I said, these are the two biggest straws that are going to break the camel's back. yeah, it is crazy that this act of war that Israel committed against Iran. This is the, I think, the closest we've been to World War III possibly ever. Would you say?
Um, no, I think the Cuban Missile Crisis brought us closer, and apparently, um,
I
I,
would argue against that, even though
yeah,
I wasn't there around that
okay,
time. I don't know it, but
right.
because
Well,
we
I think
see,
there was, it really was thanks to John F. Kennedy and Khrushchev. Apparently, a lot of their advisors were telling them to, to launch the missiles. I mean,
hmm,
it's just really, and if they had been weak presidents, it could have happened. Unfortunately, like,
well, I don't want to alarm you,
yeah,
but our president
yeah,
isn't the strongest
I
right
know,
now.
right, and also another thing. This is something that Jeffrey Sachs pointed out, which I think is very important. That Khrushchev and Kennedy had been communicating. They'd actually been communicating by letter,
Hmm.
in the time up to before the crisis. So they already had a kind of an understanding. They had come to learn to trust each other and to respect each other. And so it was possible for them to open this direct channel of communication and to ignore the survivors. One thing is that, yeah, that um, we often empathy is such an important part of really any kind of real diplomacy, and that they were able to understand like the difficulties that that their counterpart was experiencing. Say, okay, I've got these advisors telling me to press a button; they're putting all kinds of pressure on me. You know what? Probably Kennedy's experienced the same thing, and vice versa.
Let's work
And
something out.
yeah, let's work something out.
Right.
Exactly.
But
But we don't have that now. You're
that's
right.
why I feel like it's more
Right.
dangerous. We
But
talked about this
right,
before. There was always
right,
communication with the
right,
Soviet Union. We had competent leadership. We don't have competent
right,
leadership in the West. Israel seems to be hell bent on provoking Iran into a war, provoking a war with Iran by dragging us into it.
right.
And it just seems like they might get their way. Let's talk about that a little bit. Iran has, I think I saw the headline, and the direct quote was, "Iran will deliver Israel a slap in the face." And then I saw another headline that Israel is preparing for an Iranian retaliation.
Right. Yeah.
Isn't that, compare this to the Cuban Missile Crisis? I mean, sure, it's
Well,
not directly the Soviet Union
right.
driving missiles in there, but you
Yeah.
can, I
That's
can,
and it's not directly nuclear yet,
but the
but a war
potential.
between Iran.
But we're not even saying
Right.
nuclear. I'm talking about
Yeah.
just a larger scale war where the
Right.
United States gets
Could.
dragged in, and
Right.
then Russia gets dragged in,
Yeah.
and then
Right.
all bets
Or a
are
score
off.
that where Israel finds its back against the sea, and just at the point of losing, they might exercise the Samson option.
Hmm.
That's a real risk. Yeah, no, of course it's very scary. I don't know. I said that I again, just based on Iran's past behavior, they've been very cool and they've put up with an awful lot. They've suffered grievous provocations in the past, as bad as this. Um, and, they've always kind of just bore them stoically and just kept their eye on the ball, continue to pursue their strategy, which really has been successful. I mean, they've turned things around in their own country, and they've made peace with Saudi Arabia. They're now okay. They're sanctioned by the West, but who cares? Now they're part of
BRICS
yeah,
plus.
BRICS plus, and uh, yeah, their links. They're, I guess, on the verge of signing a treaty with Russia. They've signed all kinds of big contracts with China, and they have a lot of the strategy that they pursued has been really very successful, and they've been cautious, and that just makes me think that they're going to be very reluctant, to put it all in jeopardy. They also know what war means. They were in a very bloody war with Iraq, in the early '80s, where I don't know the exact casualty figures, but I assume millions of Iranians died, and they were the subject of weapons of mass destruction attacks, made in part possible by the U.S. This is the great irony, of course.
Mm.
So, they know what war means. And there's still a lot of people in Iran with a very fresh memory of that. And um,
Well, does any of that matter if Israel just wants war? Because it seems like this is Netanyahu needs this to survive, right? I mean, Netanyahu, I think he wants to
right,
brought water into this war at all costs because his own, not his own, just not his political life is on the line. His actual life is on the line. He's very unpopular
his
in
freedom
his
anyway.
freedom, right?
Yeah,
His freedom is on the line. He's looking at jail time if when this war ends. So he doesn't seem to have any incentive to end it.
right.
Um, we've seen a little bit of a pushback with the seven aid workers that were killed from the World
Yeah,
Kitchen Center.
eventually that broke out. There's some real anger, and in the Western press, and not nearly as much, and a lot of spin, and not as much as there should be, not nearly as much, but and a lot of spin. I read, I've seen the New York Times headlines and read the New York Times stories. Um, but yeah, no, it's made it certainly. I think Israel suffered damage because of that. That was something they couldn't hide.
But do you think anything will change? Will the course change? There was talk that Biden had a very stern talk with Netanyahu and is going to put some type of contingencies on future military assistance. Is
Yeah,
that true?
I just don't believe it. He's been talking like this for months now. I mean, maybe he's been kind of heating up the rhetoric somewhat, but there hasn't been any change in policy. There hasn't been any slowdown in the shipments of bombs and other munitions to Israel. And I'll only believe it when he actually backs up the talk with some action. When what he could do. I mean, like a lot of these shipments, they're frankly unconstitutional, or they're he's supposed to get congressional approval for them, but he does them anyway. So
How do they get by with that? What do they
well,
call it?
okay, I think that's so maybe unconstitutional is well, no, I guess it because the Congress is supposed to exercise control over these shipments. The Congress passed a law that that no sales could be made to foreign countries without the approval of Congress, except when the interest of the U.S. is in imminent danger or some such language. And so that's what they used that clause, but it was not the interest of the U.S. This was not for. Obviously, it's for Israel, so it was clearly a violation of this law. But they've done it again and again. They've been making these shipments, and yeah, he did one just earlier this week. Another large shipment. So this was after a lot of the angry talk and the pretense of a rift or whatever. There's no rift. I don't believe it. I won't believe it until I see something substantive happen.
So, do you think that the killing of those 7 aid workers was a turning point in any way, or was it just a blip and things will continue as normal?
Well, I guess it's too early to say that it's a turning point. If we see something in the next few days that an actual change of policy, more than just rhetoric, then I would say that it's not a turning point. Again, it's just you say it's another kind of chip in the foundation of support for Israel. No question. I think that probably woke up, just another. I don't know how many people, but a certain number of people to the reality of what was going on there. And, again, these were very much like it was the world's central kitchen. And the chef who ran it was somebody who was very cozy with the liberal establishment. And he probably believed that, everything that he'd been hearing about Gaza, and probably figured like, oh yeah, those bad people in the UN, we'll help out, we'll step in, we'll do the right thing. And yeah, but now he's very angry,
Right.
terrified, horrified by what happened.
Right. So if Biden stopped military assistance to Israel, would this be over right away? Like, what would happen to Israel? I mean, and Netanyahu doesn't want to stop, obviously.
Yeah.
The Israeli population doesn't want to stop. So does this atrocity only exist because of us?
I think you have to say that. I mean, it would have stopped a long time ago because they are using, okay, those bombs that are dropping are bombs that are supplied by us. And I believe we're doing quite a bit more than that, providing intelligence and
Yeah.
satellite, photos and so on and so forth. Um, but yeah, they would have run out of weapons a long time, out of munitions, a long time ago. I'm sure they have a certain amount of stock. They could fight for another couple of weeks, maybe, but at some point in the near future, they would have to stop. I mean, then the alternative is to go nuclear. I mean,
Mhm.
that's and it's either that or okay, agree to a ceasefire. I think they would agree to a ceasefire.
Yeah, so well, maybe we can try to play out these two scenarios a little bit. So, I mean, there's one where I feel like Israel is playing against the clock right now. I feel like they're trying to get us dragged into a wider war with Iran and commit fully to Israel as soon as we can because Netanyahu and the Likud, the people in the Knesset, realize that there is a chance that the U.S. can pull support. And if they do pull support, what happens? Like you said, they will. Israel will have the option of either going nuclear or just ceasefire, and they would just stop, and then they
Well,
would like they've destroyed so much of
right.
Gaza, they will take it. Right? It can't just end. Like, what would happen if
Yeah. Well, you know, I think they would have to agree to a ceasefire. But just knowing both sides, just both the Biden administration and Israel, that it might just be a temporary ceasefire. It may be, and Israel would make some noises about, maybe even about a two-state solution or beginning the process towards a two-state solution down the road, which would make a lot. It's impossible. They have no intention of doing it. It's actually kind of incredible that Netanyahu has just been quite open about it. It used to be, I don't think it's Israel or most of the people who have led Israel over the last few decades never really had an intention. If they did, we wouldn't be an intention to establish a two-state solution. If they did, we wouldn't be where we are now. But they would at least engage in the process. It was just a cover for them, as
Mhm.
they continued to seize land in the West Bank. They could speak about this process, the peace process. Now, Netanyahu has dropped the pretense and says, to hell with that. But you could go back to the old ways, pretend that we got a peace process going, et cetera, and then actually start up the war in Gaza and some later on, maybe go at it slightly differently, or
Yeah, well, we talked
maybe
about
yeah,
this before. Once you have so much blood on your hands, you can't really stop. So even I'm just trying to think of what would happen if the U.S. said, "We're not going to give you any more bombs, any more munitions." I just don't think Israel could stop, even if they wanted to,
yeah,
right? So
right. Well,
how would they play it out? They
yeah,
would
but
just
they just can't. I mean, if you don't have any,
unless they went nuclear.
right, right, um,
What
is
do you think is more likely? It's between like a
yeah.
rock and a hard place. I
Yeah.
feel
Well,
like
I
for the
kind of think
Israelis.
there is a sort of a squishy middle where they just might choose to engage in subterfuge and kind of take a step back. Maybe this is not possible. It looks like maybe they're so out of control as we're saying that they can't. But let's just say that they realize, okay, we can't continue as we are. Let's lower the temperature a bit. Okay, let's express an interest in a peace process. Let's have a ceasefire for a while. Okay, but let's at the same time maybe occupy some of that land in northern Gaza and make preparations for another attack. And there always will come up with a reason why we just had to do it. And in the meantime, we know that our friends in the media and the think tanks and so on are going to be talking about the incredible concessions that Israel has made,
Mhm.
um, and the betrayal, by the Biden administration and whatever. And boy, there's going to be a lot of, Biden's going to take a lot of flack from the Zionists, right? And perhaps he was trying to allay the base in his own party, but then, he may find that, that the having the Zionists against him is going to really hurt him. Again, that's where most of the money comes from. And then, I don't know exactly how Trump would play it, but he could play the anti-Semitism card and they call this a stab in the back of Israel and whatever. Anyway, Biden might find himself in a real fix. And then again, you just know how this is going to be portrayed. Is so maybe by making temporary apparent concessions, actually accepting a temporary ceasefire, maybe talking about restarting the peace process, Israel will be able to consolidate its support. Biden might find himself, just hemmed in, by all the supporters of Israel in this country, and they'll just get going again. Maybe after the election, but maybe even before.
So you're saying that basically the best possibility, if you even say it's the best, maybe it's worse outcome, is that we would just drag out the genocide a bit longer. We would get to be a ceasefire temporarily, but you're basically saying Israel won't stop. They might just go at a slower rate, or wait a little bit for the temperature to drop, like you said, and then continue again. Yeah. But there is no end. The people in Gaza are doomed unless there's something huge like Iran getting involved, or basically I think it would be Hezbollah or Egypt or Jordan
in Egypt, or or a change of policy in Egypt, right?
So there's the two solutions are the genocide goes through, or there is going to be a wider regional war that could very likely go nuclear because the very existence of Israel is at stake.
Well, it's never it's just
it's never a binary.
It's never a binary. Yeah, there may be something else, and I guess those are both possibilities, and it just seems to me, maybe I'm just too cynical, but I think the cynicism is warranted based on what I've seen. Actually, ever since I've been following events in Palestine, I think it's completely warranted. Israel is not interested in peace, and it's just clear that they want the total defeat, of the Palestinians, total subjugation, or actually more than that. They just want them gone. They want the land, and they're hoping they can do it right now, but maybe they realize we can't. Okay, perhaps they'll just take like the northern half of Gaza right now, and then they'll just make conditions for the remaining Gazans just that much more miserable, but perhaps just short of outright starvation, or just of slow starvation. I mean, it sounds awful, but it's something they've done, and I think they could continue to do. And it's maybe I'd like to believe that they can't get away with that, but it just.
Has it ever been in the past where people were so aware of what Israel's doing? Because I just feel like, maybe they can lower the temperature, but do you think people will actually stop and forget? I feel like the spotlight has been of the atrocities that Israel's committed.
No, I think really
been shown on them. So
right. I think this permanent damage has been done, and I think they still have we have just the power structures in the U.S. are such that. They're all aligned with Israel, and that's very unfortunate, but it's true. And the U.S. still is the world's most powerful country, but just looking at the long term, I don't think it's going to hold. I don't know, how much longer it's going to go on. Again, those are
this is what we're talking about in the beginning. Right. Well, we started actually we got here because I started the question by asking you. There's a lot of which straw would break the camel's back, and I was referring to the camel's back is the United States, the United States as a government, as a country, is cracking and breaking. And you said that that this is one of the biggest straws. So can you tie it back in how this would affect us in the United States? How does what's happening in Israel and Palestine, and whether or not we support them or not, how does this break our system here? Does it break our system through simply civil unrest and people being aware of what's happening, or is it the economy, or just distrust in the system?
Right. Well, again, we're going back to the Soviet Union. What in the years leading up to the fall of the Soviet Union, the disintegration of the Soviet Union, there was just a loss of faith. People just became very cynical. Okay. I don't know exactly how widespread, but that's my understanding. It's just that, people went through the motions. They knew that they were supposed to express their faith in Marxism, Leninism, and the great Soviet way, and that but nobody really believed in it anymore. There was supposed to be some sort of um, this great future, this that was described for them, that was going to be that Marxism, Leninism was supposed to lead them to. At one time, I think quite a few people actually believed in it, but nobody, towards the end, virtually no one believed in it. So anyway, it's just like this growing cynicism does. You never know how a country's going to fall, but when people cease to believe in it, it just becomes, they may still be standing, but it's found, the regime is still standing, but its foundations are very fragile. And it's clear to me that, that cynicism has been growing in this country. And that what the particular effect that I see the events in Palestine having is, first of all, it is really increasing cynicism on the left hand of the spectrum. Up until recently, you would look at there were polls that showed faith in mainstream media, and it was always much stronger among Democrats. It probably still is than among Republicans. Like the Republicans in general, at some point, just stopped believing in it. Mm-hmm. And I've been going to alternative sources. Some of them are good, like Tucker Carlson. Not all of them are, but but there was still a faith in the establishment on the left hand. And now I think Israel, more than anything, Palestine, is beginning to hollow that out. I'm sure I haven't seen the latest data, but I'll look for it. I'm sure that faith in the mainstream media is dropping on the left hand side of the spectrum now. So that's one effect. But then also, if just as eventually, I think the reality is still being hidden from us, with regard to Ukraine. But eventually, it's going to be clear to everybody that our proxy war there failed, that we lost. Mm. And that wasn't supposed to happen. And people are going to remember. It's a little bit, some of these other wars are easier to walk away from. Even Vietnam, that was a real blow to American prestige. And it did lead to a real cynicism in the U.S. for a while. But we recovered from it. Or maybe, we'll say that the establishment recovered from it. But it's going to be harder to do that, again, because we're up against Russia, and it's just a little bit too close to home in a way. It's supposed to be, and there were just too many statements about the inevitability of our victory. People remember Zelensky coming and getting the standing ovations and I think it's not going to be easy to walk away from this, and it's going to be a real blow again to, people will lose faith in the military establishment. But the same thing could happen in Israel if we're drawn in to some extent. It's not going to end well. We have a lot of hotheads here who just think that, just bomb them back to the Stone Age or whatever. But if that's attempted with Iran, again, all those bases are going to be hit. Mm. It's going to be bad for Israel. It's going to be bad for aircraft carriers. An aircraft carrier gets sunk. That's a real symbol of national prestige. That people are going to wake up one day and hear about that and think, this is not the America that I used to know. It's a lot of people who should have seen that a long time ago. Maybe it's only when that ship is sunk, figuratively or literally, are they're going to.
So you feel that both the Ukraine war and the Gaza war, they will have sort of similar effects on breaking America back home, in terms of that it just is a blow to the just faith in America domestically and globally, which is
American strength in this case, military strength, right?
Military strength, right? And you said, just more cynicism and just our whole establishment, and that would begin to sort of undermine and erode the whole federal system that we have here.
Yeah, but then of course there are domestic factors. There's the economy, and that's right, and that it's real hard to know, how long it's going on, but we really have a juiced up economy that could come crashing down at any time. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors, and
a loss of faith in the United States from these two conflicts would also could translate into a loss of faith in the U.S. dollar, right? Which could bring down the U.S. That's also a possible outcome, right? That once the dollar begins to break and our money becomes worthless and we start entering potentially hyperinflation, then it's over.
Right. Well, you say, like, for me, this is exposed, especially the Ukraine conflict, is exposed truths about the American economy that I don't think anybody was really aware of. I've heard about the loss of manufacturing. Of course, we have. Anybody who's been paying attention at all the last few decades, but there was always the assumption that, well, at least we know how to, crank out those bombs and tanks and whatever, because there's so much money that goes into that. But apparently we can't. I mean, we are just being completely, we're losing the military production battle, to Russia, not just us, but, all of NATO. And you're saying, well, how could this happen? And again, at the beginning of the war, I thought, oh, the Russians better act quickly, because once we get our engines revved up, we're just, look, our economies, combine them, what are they, 10, 20 times greater than the Russian economy? Well, it makes you wonder if those figures are really right. But if they are, then why can't we outproduce them by 10 times? In fact, they're outproducing us. What's going on? It does, it's made me, even more skeptical of American power than I was before. I thought that, well, at least we could.
Same. And I think this is, maybe Americans don't realize this as much because they're not seeing the same news that we're seeing or following these conflicts as closely as we are. But definitely the rest of the world sees it, and that will definitely have implications just on U.S. hegemony. We won't be able to.
Right. It already has.
Right.
It's really a huge impact.
So the writing is on the wall. So, this is what I'm sorry I keep coming back to this. I just keep on feeling like I just know that the collapse is happening, and there's all these things that are adding up to just a collapse of the U.S. empire. And I'm just trying to ask you to make sense of it. I know you're not a prophet and you can't predict what's going to happen, but what's going to sorry, I'm going to ask you one more time. What's going to happen? How is this going to play out? All right, I'll say this. I feel like what's happening right now, I feel like, is that Biden is doing everything he can to just hold it together to the election. Right. I think we're trying to get another $61 billion of aid to Ukraine, even though we know that this money isn't going to do anything. What are they going to do with this money? It will do three things, right? It will enrich the arms manufacturing industry in the United States, line a few pockets. That money goes back to pay off congressmen that voted to push this through. Two, it will perhaps extend the war, which means that just more Ukrainians will die. And then three, it will just means that Ukraine will, if we extend the war, it just means Ukraine will lose more territory, right? So that's basically all we're doing. You're just dooming the Ukrainians longer by giving them more money. The war is over. I think there was a piece in Politico. Do you remember that piece? What was the headline?
Yeah.
Which came out yesterday or the day before yesterday.
Right. Well, something like the Ukraine project is at risk of imminent failure or something.
Right.
But actually the content, because what it is, what makes it really interesting is, first of all, okay, this is a mainstream kind of, I think, left establishment kind of paper or media outlet. And then the news source is actually Ukrainian military officials.
Right. So the Ukrainian military themselves are saying that this is over. It's done. Right. Our failure is imminent. And people, if you're paying attention to the Ukrainian war, you know that this is true. We talked about it before. There's no air defense system. Yeah. Russia has really ramped up. It has kind of fine-tuned its military engine into destroying whatever's left of Ukraine defenses. 3,000 kilogram glide bombs just blowing things up, hypersonic missiles.
Right.
It's easy. Cakewalk for them now.
And I think actually another factor, the one reason that may explain why they're, hitting more and more targets is that, they launched these satellites. At the beginning of the war, they had very few satellites over Ukraine, but they have some very effective ones now that apparently is contributing to the accuracy of these strikes, just by the glide bombs and by the missiles and so on and so forth. But that political article said, they're losing the war. They're going to lose the war. And then I think very importantly, these officials, these Ukrainian military officials are saying the $61 billion won't change anything. Mm.
But we're going to push it through anyways. Yeah. Our taxpayer money. Right. And maybe what it will do is extend it a little bit, line the pockets of the corrupt military industrial complex. So even if Biden does get all this money through and he's trying to extend the war, do you believe that's what he's trying to extend the war till the election?
Yeah, well, he certainly doesn't want to have a collapse of the front line there, before the election.
I think even if he does, like he said, even Politico mentioned it, even if we do waste more of our money on this war, it's good. I don't think Biden can even drag it out till the end of it, till the election, anyways. It's
Probably not.
going
Yeah.
it's going so fast at an increasing rate that they can't conscript people. They don't have the men. They don't have the equipment, and I feel like there's just been a complete loss of morale. So I think he's doomed there. Um, and then on the Gaza front, I think it's probably the same game that he's trying to play. Let's don't commit this genocide during the election year.
Right.
Just pause, and maybe after the election, you can get your engines revving again and complete your genocide.
Yeah,
is that kind of what it's? Is that what's happening?
I know it sounds absolutely horrible, but it is horrible. Yeah, I think that's probably right.
Okay, so I don't know what my question is here, but I don't think. Do you think either he will be able to pull either of those off to extend the suffering basically in both of these conflicts longer until the end?
I don't think so.
So neither.
Right. I think because these are two things that he can't really control. I mean, it's clear, like they thought they could control what was going to happen in Ukraine. They thought that they're going to bring about the collapse of Russia and whatever, and so on and so forth. They thought that the summer offensive of 2023 was supposed to, break the back of the Russian army. But they're wrong. The Russians had a say in it, and the Russians have a huge say in what happens, this year before the election, and they're not going to care. They're not going to protect Joe Biden. So, it's not a certain thing that the front will collapse before them, but it seems probable, just based on what I've been hearing. And then in, Israel, it's just clear that, yeah, he really wished probably that, for example, that the Israelis didn't kill those World Central Kitchen personnel, and that they would tone down their rhetoric some, and that kind of thing. But he clearly can't control them. I mean, and the Israelis just have Netanyahu, and they just have this sense of invulnerability, which has been built up by this unconditional support by people like Biden. Over the decades, to the point they've created this monster who just says, yeah, try it.
What's so crazy is both of these disasters that are pushing us to the brink of World War III and ultimately the collapse of the American empire were so easily avoidable.
Mm-hmm.
There was at the beginning of the Ukraine war in 2022, right, there was a peace deal being negotiated between Ukraine and Russia. And then Boris Johnson was sent by Biden to scuttle it, to torpedo it, and said no peace.
March 2022. Yeah.
March. Okay, so exactly March 22, just a month after.
Right, and then also there was a chance to avert it ahead of time.
Right, the Minsk agreements,
right.
multiple.
Right, there was times. Even apparently there was a conversation between Putin and Biden before the war. And was it January, or maybe even it was just shortly before the war when it broke out, February 24th, 2022. Before then. And he was trying to get Biden to agree, not to install nuclear missiles in Ukraine or, close to the Russian border in general. And Biden said, yeah, I think we can make that commitment. And it was actually, there was a point that, maybe there was obviously this growing tension, maybe that things can calm down. The war could have been averted. And then apparently they just walked it back. It's actually his advisor said, no, you can't make that promise to him.
Right.
So, I mean, there were many chances. I mean, it was just very foolish. I mean, it's just this sense, just like the Israelis have the sense of invincibility, we do too. And that's just a very dangerous, there was a time where maybe it was warranted, like in the 1990s.
Do you think Biden still feels like we're invincible now?
He probably does. I mean, I just don't think that man has a firm grasp on reality.
So there is a clear path to peace with Ukraine and Russia that we deliberately avoided.
Right.
And then in Palestine and in Israel, um, after October 7th, Biden shows up, and then I think they bombed one of the big hospitals in Gaza City. And Biden's like, "Oh, it looks like the other team did it," I think was
Yeah.
what he said, and just kind of mumbled through and wrote Netanyahu blank check.
Right.
If at the beginning, before this bloodshed started, if we had a strong president that said, "Look, okay, you have the right to go after Hamas," if you wanted to say that the perpetrators of this attack, but you can't just carpet bomb cities,
Right.
then this whole thing could have
When
avoided.
the
At the
first
very
hospital was hit, that turned out to be the first of many hospitals, and then eventually they were all destroyed. The last
right,
one was
but
destroyed recently.
but Biden
Yeah,
just
but
said,
yeah,
go for
yeah,
it, and
right,
so these are
yeah,
both
right,
these are both the fault of our administration of our government. We had the ability to avoid all of this, and
right,
it's just so frustrating to think that when you are the most powerful country in the world and you have the world reserve currency, you have this exorbitant privilege, we should have life so easy. We just all you have to do is do nothing. We
yeah.
just don't have to do anything, and we
Avoid
could.
disasters.
Right,
Yeah,
and we actively seem to go out trying to destroy ourselves, and you see every policy that we make is still just actively speeding up the demise of our own country. To give another $61 billion to this war that we're just going to kill more people. To continue providing bombs to bomb civilians in Gaza. It's just frustrating. It's just like so. I come to this conclusion that the only possible solution is for the collapse of the American empire, is for
mhm,
the collapse of my country, my home, and it's scary to kind of think of what that means.
right,
So like you said, it seems like there's a good chance that uh, that before this election, Ukraine will collapse, the current Ukrainian regime will collapse, and that there's going to be increased escalation in the Middle East. Iran will retaliate. Israel will most likely continue with its genocide. So both of these things, these are the two biggest straws on the camel's back. You said it doesn't look like they will be resolved anytime soon,
right.
or they will be resolved in a way that just exposes the rot in our own system, our own government.
Mhm.
So I'm going to ask you one more time:
Yeah.
are we heading to a collapse?
Well, we certainly are. It's just, yeah, it's again, like I've said many
I
times,
want
it's
you
a
to give
fool.
me a time
Okay,
frame.
fool's errand. I don't, it could be. Really, it's impossible. I wish I could say, but it's just that.
If you
Yeah,
had a
I'll
gun,
just tell you, like every major disaster or whatever, it's just that nobody ever sees it coming. I mean, seriously, it's just that. Um,
if I put a gun to your head and said, "Is
okay,
the U.S. going to collapse within the next year?" What do you say? What are the odds? Would you take the
I
last?
okay, I would say, well, collapse in a kind of
Well,
in a
I guess we
meaningful
have to
sense,
define what collapse
right?
means. What is it? I mean,
Well,
or,
okay,
or maybe we can say I'll give you that question set. What does if you can't give me when it will happen, because I
yeah,
understand how difficult it is, and you say these institutions have a huge amount of inertia and they can continue much
right,
longer than you think.
right.
How does the collapse play out? Does it play out where there's the federal government breaks apart and we see a rise of states and individual state rights and
Yeah.
federations within
Right. Well,
within
it's
the
certainly a
country?
possibility, and we have this federal system. There that it's it's sleeping, but it's always there. State governments, and according to the original compact, that created this country, those states are supposed to be truly states. We have a
Mm.
different understanding of the word state in this country than in others. In others, the state is the country,
Right,
the
we have
the
individual
political
governments, right?
right. Um, and so we were supposed to be a federation of states.
I just want to
And
know when I can stop paying taxes. When
I just can't tell you. I could, I would just say that it would collapse within a year in a meaningful way. I mean, that, for example, collapse would be secession. I just don't see it happening that fast. Like in 5 years, I can believe it. But again, it's just sometimes these things when they happen, they're always in a way unexpected. Because people do talk about, they know something's going on, they know that there's this rot or whatever, and then, but you just get used to the rot. You get used to the, the kind of the continual craziness. But then one day there really is a revolution or a secession or collapse, economic collapse, like hyperinflation or whatever. These are all possibilities, but it's just a fool's errand to say which one it's going to be. In the end, it could be something that's going to come completely out of left field, that we haven't even talked about here. Just something that or maybe just touched on briefly because it didn't seem very important, but it'll prove to be the final straw that breaks the camel's back.
I'm going to define the collapse as when I no longer have to pay federal income tax. So hopefully soon.
Okay. All right.
Okay. I think we can end it there. It's been close to an hour. Okay. Thanks a lot, Dad.